So obviously a lot of people are still talking about the releases that happened this week that were announced by WWE. Several high-profile WWE superstars were released from their contract on the very same day, a year to the day, in fact, that last year we had the Black Wednesday, didn't we, after WrestleMania 36? Well, this year it was Black Thursday because a year to the day, several high-profile WWE superstars were released. Now, we're not going to go into if it was good, bad, or the right decision, wrong decision, whatever. What we are going to go into today, I think, is about going through each superstar or each talent individually and saying where they could go next, why maybe it went wrong, or what was the decision to let them go, that kind of stuff. My opinion on the overall situation really hasn't changed all that much, to be honest with you. My opinion at the time was that it was incredibly cold by WWE, especially when you're talking a year to the day. I mean, to this point now, every time it gets to April 15th, people are going to be looking over their shoulders because who's to say the same thing won't happen again next year? And that would be a massive concern for any talent or any superstar, is that come April 15th, they might lose their job. How do you live like that? How do you live like that? That just seems incredibly cold. And for a lot of these stars here, I don't think anyone ever really deserves to lose their job unless they've done something wrong. I get that it's business, but for some of these releases, still to this day, I'm still trying to wrap my head around why it happened. I mean, we will go into this when we go through each superstar individually, but there are stories, there are reports that have come out since then, but maybe a reason why they've been let go, all that kind of stuff. It still, to me, is very, very odd. But we are going to talk about a little bit about the background of their departure, where they're going to go next, and I think that's a positive. That is what I want to try and get across in this video, is that previously in the past, when you were let go from WWE, there might have been a bit of a cause for concern because WWE was the only game in town. I know in the past there might have been TNA and all that kind of stuff, but WWE was really the only game in town, and that was the place you really made the big, big money. And now that's not the case. Even with the pandemic as it isn't the case like it was a couple of years ago, but even with the pandemic the way that it is, there are plenty of options for all of these talents, whether it is AEW, whether it's Impact, whether it's New Japan, whether it's Ring of Honor, whether it is some of the other indie shows that are open. There are a ton of other places to go and work. And I think that's the real positive thing here, is that for a lot of these people, in fact, probably for the majority of them, this isn't the end, it's only the beginning. And I'm sure, and I don't know this to be factually accurate, but I'm probably 99.9% sure that a lot of these people already have had discussions with promotions or intermediaries that have reached out to them and said, look, when your 90 days are up, because everyone's got the 90-day non-compete clause, when your 90 days are up, you've got a place to work. So I think that's a positive. Whilst it may be disappointing that the WWE dream for now is over, the wrestling dream is far from over for a lot of these guys. So I think that's something that I do want to positively spin in this video. So let's get straight into the names, and let's start off obviously with the biggest name, that being Samoa Joe. Now when it comes to Joe, again, this was really, really surprising because not only because of the talent that he is in the ring, he's a world-class talent, even that he's not even in his peak anymore. He's not in the prime stages of his career. He's not the Samoa Joe that he was in Ring of Honor or TNA or anything like that, but he's still a world-class talent, and it is a crying shame. It's a crying shame that Samoa Joe never became a world champion in WWE, never became a universal champion or whatever, because he was just that good. Now, I know people are going to talk about being injury prone, but there are plenty of superstars on the WWE roster that are injury prone and still under contract. And also as well, you have to consider this. Samoa Joe's a guy that, yes, he was injury prone, and I get that, especially over the last few years, but it wasn't as if he was sitting on the sidelines doing nothing. He was a high-profile commentator for WWE, and arguably their best color commentator that they had under contract. Samoa Joe, everything that he did it at a world-class level, even commentary. This was a period of time as well that when Joe first came in 2019 to do the commentary for Monday Night Raw, they just couldn't find a commentator. They couldn't find a commentator that either they liked or that worked in that position. They tried Dio Madden. He wanted to be a wrestler, so he goes to be a wrestler in NXT. Then he becomes Mace as part of Retribution. I don't know which one he would have preferred. Nevertheless, so he's part of NXT. They bring back Jerry Lawler. Jerry Lawler's in that spot, but again, it's kind of like, Jerry Lawler, I get that Jerry Lawler, but you're not getting the Jerry Lawler from the 1990s. You're not getting Jerry Lawler from the Attitude Era or the Monday Night Wars. You're getting today's version of Jerry Lawler, and no disrespect, and I don't want to be disrespectful at all when it comes to his age, but you do need to find someone that is going to be able to be there for the foreseeable future, and Jerry Lawler's not that guy anymore. He is a Hall of Famer, and his contributions to the wrestling business are unparalleled, and he truly is one of the best color commentators of all time, but everyone has their peak, and everyone has their day, and Jerry Lawler passed his peak, unfortunately, a long time ago. So with Joe in there, and again, for me, Joe's money was always in the ring. It still is. His money is in the ring. But the one thing you could say is that Joe was doing a fantastic job, an absolutely excellent job on commentary. He commentated both nights of WrestleMania. As I mentioned, he was the best commentator, color commentator in WWE. There was no reason for him to be fired, for him to be let go. And that was the really shocking thing. It's not a case of Joe's been injured for a long time and sat on the sidelines and he hasn't been cleared and then it becomes a financial decision. You could partially understand that one, but he's been featured. He's arguably been featured more on WWE television than anyone else. And, because he's been on TV every single week, and he was commentating on both nights of WrestleMania. He was the guy, when they had the WrestleMania rain delay, he was there with Michael Cole, with the anorak on, with the waterproof stuff on, to carry on doing commentary during the show. He was that important, so that's why it was very surprising. Now, obviously, since then, we've had a couple of reports about what maybe did or didn't happen when it comes to Samoa Joe in WWE. By all accounts, he's been pushing to start wrestling again. He's been pushing to return to the ring, and WWE reportedly, and this comes from Fightful, Sean Ross Sapp over there, be sure to check that out, their Patreon service. It was on Fightful Select, I believe. They've reported that basically WWE still hadn't cleared Samoa Joe to return to the ring. Now, what is Samoa Joe's injury? Well, it's complicated, isn't it? When it was 2020, so at the end of 2019, he was doing the commentary on Raw because he had a thumb injury. Now that recovered. He then goes into a feud with Seth Rollins, AOP, Buddy Murphy. He's teaming up with Kevin Owens during that whole time. And what happens is there was a tag team match on Monday Night Raw, I believe it was around February of 2020, where he does a suicide dive to the outside of the ring, and he suffers a stinger. Now, the stinger back in the day was kind of code word for a concussion. They didn't know whether it was a concussion at the time, but he suffered a stinger, didn't really know where he was. I don't know if it was a full-blown concussion. Considering that he was doing this commercial film the next week, I doubt that it was. So he suffered a stinger. He suffered a nasty blow to the head, but he didn't test positive for a concussion or anything like that. Well, the following week, he's filming a commercial for WWE for the USA Network, a Monday Night Raw commercial, that must be Monday. Remember that terrible tagline, must be Monday? And it was just an awful advert. It was a terrible advert. And during the advert, he gets slammed through an announce table, similarly to how he had been thrown through an announce table previously at the end of 2019. So he's thrown through the announce table and he suffers a concussion, a proper concussion this time. And if you want to count his stinger as a concussion, the week prior, he basically suffers 2 concussions back to back. That's very serious. That's very serious. Alexa Bliss had a similar problem in 2018. She suffered a series of concussions really close to each other. That goes against the WWE protocol. Then they keep you off of TV for a while. You can have long-lasting concussion effects, all that kind of stuff. So Joe's off of television because of the concussion. During that time as well, about a couple of weeks later, he also violates the wellness policy for the first time. So he's suspended for 30 days as well. So he's got 2 concussions and a suspension. It's just not going well for him. So whilst he's recovering from his injury, they bring him back. He goes on commentary because they needed, as I mentioned, that strong third commentary position. And Joe does fantastic. Now, obviously, with Joe being on commentary, as the time went on and on and on, people would ask, is it a case of a Daniel Bryan or something like that? Has he had too many concussions that he has to retire? What's the situation? And every time he spoke about it in an interview, Samoa Joe said, look, I'm not retired. I plan on returning to the ring. WWE's taking care of my health. I'm feeling better, but rest assured, I haven't retired and I will return to the ring one day. And if this report is accurate, it's that WWE still hadn't cleared him. Now, I don't know. I don't profess to know. I'm not going to speculate on what the situation is with him, with the concussions. I don't know. All I know is that there have been several occasions, and I don't mean this to slander WWE's medical team or anything like that, but we've seen this. We have seen this over the course of the last few years at this point, that I don't know if WWE's medical team clearing someone or not clearing someone is as cut and dry as we think anymore. We used to think that WWE's medical team was the be-all and end-all when it came to clearing someone to wrestle again, and we now know that's really not the case, because Daniel Bryan, remember, he wasn't cleared for what, a couple of years by WWE's medical team for concussions, And then he starts going around to all these different doctors, and they say, you know what, actually, you're fine. You can wrestle. I don't know what they're saying, but you can wrestle. And then Daniel Bryan, it gets to a point where his contract's expiring. And he says to WWE's medical team, look, my contract's expiring, and these doctors have cleared me to wrestle. I know for a fact, if I let my contract expire and I go on the indie scene, or I go to New Japan, or I go wherever, they're going to clear me to wrestle. I'm going to wrestle either way. You can't stop me. So maybe you want to have another look at my condition. Then wouldn't you know it, suddenly he's cleared. Now, I'm not one of these conspiracy people, far from it. I just think that's quite ironic. It's the same with Edge, Edge gets a call from AEW. They say, look, we saw you did a spear against Elias at SummerSlam in 2019. Can you get yourself cleared from a couple of doctors? We'll have our doctors look at you as well, but can you? Edge goes around to a couple of different doctors again. They go, you know what, actually, you're all right. You can wrestle if you want to. Take it safe, but you can wrestle if you want to. And then he goes to the AEW doctors. They say the same thing. So Edge, being loyal to WWE and Vince McMahon, goes to Vince McMahon and says, look, I've got an offer from AEW. And these doctors are saying I'm cleared. Wouldn't you know it, Edge gets cleared again. So I don't know. And again, I'm not accusing WWE malpractice or anything like that. I'm really not. I'm just saying it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if Joe does go to a couple of other doctors, especially with concussions. It's so subjective. He goes to some doctors and they say, you know what, you're fine, mate. You can work if you want to. And then Samoa Joe continues to work. So I think Joe, when it comes to his future, personally, I see him going to AEW. I could possibly see a situation where he works in Impact Wrestling as well, given the history he obviously has there. He's a former world champion, tag team champion, X Division champion. He's one of the guys that put the X Division and TNA wrestling, frankly, on the map. So I wouldn't be surprised. And obviously, it's the same time as it was last year. So a lot of these guys' contracts, a lot of these WWE Superstars contracts, that 90-day non-compete clause expires around the time of Slammiversary. So who's to say Joe doesn't show up at Slammiversary? I'm just leaning more towards AEW. I just think he's a big enough name. At this point, AEW, I know they've got a lot of criticism for signing these ex-WWE guys, but it kind of fits a pattern at this point that it's only now, I think, when these sort of upper-level WWE guys are getting released that they're going to AEW. And I think Joe falls completely in there. I think if Joe signs of AEW, he can be a world champion. I wouldn't be surprised if he is a world champion. Joe just spits fire on the microphone anyway, let alone when he has a chip on his shoulder and he has something to prove. So I see personally Joe going to AEW. Wouldn't rule out an Impact run potentially, but Joe, I think, will end up going to AEW. New Japan's an option again with all of these superstars. New Japan is an option. It's just the case of the travel and the restrictions of entering Japan, quarantining. Are they willing to do that? So that's the issue there. I know they have the New Japan Strong Show in the United States. They can do that as well. So that's something worth considering there. But to be honest, I think Joe goes to AEW. Let's go and talk about arguably the second most surprising one, which is Billie Kay. Now, Billie Kay was the first announced to be released by WWE along with Mickie James. And this one was surprising because she'd been so featured on WWE television as well. And she was, put it this way, if crowds were around throughout the entirety of the past 12 months, Billie Kay wouldn't have been released. She would have been too over. She'd have been too over and too popular that they wouldn't have a choice. Billie Kay's comedy actually is legitimate comedy. It's funny. And I was surprised that her and Carmella didn't win at WrestleMania because that felt to me like the story, that she'd been handing out her resume for this whole time, right? Handing out the resume for this whole time, and then the payoff is her winning at WrestleMania, finding a tag team partner eventually, and winning a title. That wasn't the case. Now, the reports that have come out since, these are really, really frustrating, and they get me really angry, these reports that have come out since. The reports that have come out since essentially are from Fightful, once again. And it's saying that WWE executive, he's basically the head of television and production, Kevin Dunn, we've heard all these Kevin Dunn stories, doesn't get Billie Kay and didn't understand her appeal and thought there was a ceiling for her. Now, the Fightful Select did stress and emphasize that this might not be the reason for her departure, but the fact that Kevin Dunn wasn't a fan might have some influence there. Look, I don't know if that's accurate or not. I don't know. Fightful are very, very reputable, and I wouldn't be surprised if it is accurate, to be honest with you. If that's the case, I think it's ludicrous. I like everyone else, I think it's absolutely ludicrous. But it's not the first time we've heard this, for not necessarily about Billie Kay, but about Kevin Dunn. He doesn't like people with accents. Doesn't like people with accents. He didn't like Jim Cornette. Obviously, you can see the Jim Cornette rants about him. But by all accounts, he didn't like Becky Lynch because of her accent. He hasn't liked a plethora of people because they have an accent. And Billie Kay, and this is the same with Peyton Royce, which we'll get onto in a second, have a strong Australian accent. Guess what? Because they're from Australia. Like, that's not, it's not a surprise. So I find that ludicrous, and it's just stupid. And it goes to this point that, when it comes to people like Kevin Dunn, and the same with Vince McMahon, and maybe even Bruce Pritchard, that these older guys, do they really know what the modern day audience in 2021 wants? I don't think they do, and I don't think they care. That's the ultimate thing about it. And this is the thing, that they know that this will pass. This is the problem. People can be annoyed, and they can be pissed off that Billie Kay got released. In the grand scheme of things, will it change anything? No. She'll go on and be absolutely she'll be massively successful in wherever she goes. Well, I'll say where I think she goes in a second. But does WWE care? No, they don't. And they don't care what the audience thinks. And it's just a massive shame. It's a massive shame because, one, why would the Iconics split up anyway? Still to this day, I don't know. It's a ludicrous decision. It's absolutely stupid. Considering that they split these two up and then they put them in separate tag teams. At the time, the rumor was that they were split up because Vince McMahon saw big things in Peyton Royce. She was going to be pushed on Raw. Well, if anything, Billie Kay got pushed more on SmackDown. She got more over on SmackDown. And they ended up releasing both of them anyway. Where is the logic there? There isn't any. There isn't any logic there. That's the answer. There is no logic there. It's stupid. Now, as far as where I see Billie Kay going, I know some people have said AEW as well. I don't necessarily see that. To be honest, considering that Peyton Royce also got released, and we'll touch on her in a second, considering they both got released, I think you would go somewhere where you can be a female tag team and you can be a tag team champions. And I think that's Impact Wrestling. I think you go to Impact, they've got the Knockouts Tag Team Championships. The Knockouts Tag Team Championships were made for a tag team like the Iconics. And obviously, they were always in WWE going to be hampered, if that's the right word. They were always going to be stuck by the WWE's creative process and the writing process and how the writers scripted their promos and their vignettes and all that kind of stuff. Can you imagine them being completely loose, doing whatever they want, doing their own promos in Impact Wrestling for the Knockouts Tag Team Championships? That's money. That is absolute money, and that's exactly where I think they need to be. So I think that Billie Kay goes to Impact Wrestling, and I think if they get Billie Kay and if they get Peyton Royce, that's a massive signing for Impact. It's a massive signing. So I really, really, really wouldn't be surprised if we see them show up at Slammiversary. We've obviously got the tag team champions in Impact, the Knockouts tag team champions, Fire and Flavor right now. I wouldn't be surprised if they hold the titles until Slammiversary and we see some kind of open challenge or something like that, and that's where the Iconics make their debut. I can already see that, and I think that works already. So that's where I think Billie Kay's going. So obviously we just spoke about her there. Peyton Royce as well. Again, this was the strange one. It was a strange one. Once Billie Kay got released, and this is going to sound terrible, but you kind of almost hope that Peyton Royce would go with her because it's been proven that they're better off together. And don't get me wrong, they're both incredibly talented on their own. But I think considering their friendship and the bond that they have, you would prefer to see them together. I think Peyton Royce, again, I think it's really unfortunate because by all accounts, considering if you want to believe the reports, the reason they were split up is because Vince McMahon saw big things in Peyton Royce. Remember that report? It was something like Vince McMahon sees big things in Bayley, Bianca Belair, and Peyton Royce. Well, Peyton Royce is released now. And what did they do on Raw? They put her in a tag team straight away with Lacey Evans. It was just stupid. And everyone at that time said, wait, you split up a tag team. And it could be justifiable. It could be justifiable if Peyton Royce actually went on, then she went into women's championship matches, or she feuded with Asuka, or she got a big push as a single star, but she didn't. She went straight into a tag team, a worse tag team with Lacey Evans, and then just disappeared to the point that she was released. And it's this kind of meddling, trying to fix things that aren't broken, splitting up tag teams. I mean, a couple of these names on this list are people that were in tag teams and split up and then just thrown to the side. We'll touch on another one in a second in Tucker. It's just this constant, we've got to try and fix things. We've got to try and mess with things, and they're not broken most of the time. And it's almost like it's a creative team trying to be creative because they're trying to justify why they're there. If they're not pitching things that's breaking up tag teams or trying to do this or changing characters, then why are they there? but it's meddling for the sake of meddling, and it's stupid. So when it comes to Peyton Royce, again, I see her ending up in Impact. I think the Iconics should go to Impact. I think they should dominate the Knockouts Tag Team Championship division. And then afterwards, they can become Knockouts champions in a single sense. Because if you're going to do female wrestling outside of WWE North America, you go to Impact. Now, don't get me wrong. I've been very, very critical in the past of the AEW Women's Division. I do think it's progressing. I do think it's getting better. I don't think just having one main event fixes everything. I do think there's ways to go, and I still do think the philosophy when it comes to how they book female talent does need to change, but it is progressing and it is getting better. I think if you're a female wrestler now, though, I still think if you're not going to be in WWE, you go to Impact, because that's where you can really have great matches. They've still got a great pool of talent there, but they are losing a couple. They're losing Jazz. Obviously, Jazz is retiring. Nevaeh's just left. You've got Taya Valkyrie going to WWE. There are spots open. And there's certainly spots for, look, if a Peyton Royce or a Billie Kay comes in as a singles to Impact Wrestling, they can easily become Knockouts champion and have a fantastic run, build up your reputation, and then who knows what can happen in the future. Now, speaking of former Knockouts champions, another name that was released was Mickie James. Now, this one, again, was just, I think, just a massive shame, because I can almost understand. I can hear the reasons. I'm not going to say I understand them. I can hear the reasons that WWE would give for not doing stuff with Mickie James. And they would just say, well, look, she's old. But she's not old. She's not old at all. And again, it's this kind of, it's a double standard with females. It's a double standard with females that I don't understand. If a male talent is in their 40s, right? If a male talent is in their 40s, they're in their prime when it comes to WWE, right? They're in their, like I said, they're in their prime. AJ Styles, he's in his mid-40s. Edge is in his mid-40s. He's in the main events. Mickie James, suddenly, if she's older, and I don't even know Mickie James' age, I'm assuming that she's in her 40s. Let's do a quick check. Just so you can tell that I do most of my videos in one take. Let's check how old Mickie James is. I'm going to say that I think she's probably like 40. She's 41. So that was right. So if you had a male talent that's 41, it'd be, yeah, main event, absolutely. Bobby Lashley, he's in his 40s, he's the WWE champion. So this double standard when it comes to females, that suddenly if they're past 40, can't be pushing them. Too old. Got to get the younger female talent over. It's ludicrous. It's a double standard. It's an absolute massive double standard, and it's stupid. And Mickie James, throughout the whole year, especially on Raw, which is where she was drafted to, especially on Raw, there have been times where everyone's been going, what is going on with the Raw Women's Division? Just no matches are happening, or because Becky Lynch is off the show and because Charlotte Flair's off the show and Ronda Rousey's off the show, they just don't bother. And Asuka was doing nothing. And then they had a match on Raw. It was Asuka, Mickie James. People were excited because they went, you know what? This could be a lot of fun. Make it into a feud. Make it into a pay-per-view match. Do something with it. And then the referee ruined it. The referee botched it. He thought Mickie James had tapped out or was injured or whatever and just called off the match. Mickie James is laying there like that, not knowing what's going on. And they just never went back to it. They could have gone back to it. They could have at the very least, made something out of the botch and make it into a match. Make it into a feud, do something. And they never did. And it just feels like a massive waste. And Mickie James deserved to be treated so much better. She's a 6-time women's champion. She's a legend. You don't have many female legends on that roster still from the previous generation that bridged the gap. They don't have that, and yet they didn't use that properly. And it just felt stupid. It just felt really, really stupid. And it feels like a big waste. It feels like a massive waste. Now, I know a lot of people are saying, well, maybe she'll go to AEW, maybe she'll go to Impact. Personally, I don't see that. She could make appearances there. There's no doubt about that. If I had to pick somewhere that I think she will go, I'm going to say it's probably the NWA. And I think there's a reason for that. One being, of course, that she's married to the current NWA World Heavyweight Champion, Nick Aldis. She's based in Nashville as well, which could mean that she goes closer to, obviously, she goes back to Impact. And as I mentioned, if you're a female wrestler, I would advise you go to Impact. But look, the NWA Women's Division isn't exactly bad. You've still got Thunder Rosa under contract. You've got Serena Deeb as the Women's World Champion there. And obviously there's a bit of crossover that you could end up in AEW as well. So I think given her connection to Nick Aldis and given her connection to Billy Corgan, I think it makes sense that she goes to the NWA. If I'm the NWA, I'm looking, and we've got NWA Power back on Fight TV now, I'm looking to Mickie James and saying, just build the women's division around her. Instant credibility. And I think she'd be willing. And again, all of these stars, and this is the important thing, and I said this last year, all of these stars now have a chip on their shoulder. which is fantastic because sometimes it's how you do your best work. I know I do. If I've got something to prove, if I want to say, if I'm pissed off and I want to say to someone, look, you judged me wrong or you didn't believe I could do this, I'm going to do it and I'm going to do it better. Who's to say Mickie James at the age of 41, even though WWE didn't believe she was worth anything at this period in her career, can go out now and just elevate the NWA Women's Division or go into AEW and prove people wrong? I think absolutely she can. Absolutely she can. Now, speaking of other women's wrestlers, speaking of former Impact Knockouts champion as well, Chelsea Green, this one was really unfortunate, really, really unfortunate because talk about just not getting a bit of luck. And that's it. She just didn't get a bit of luck. Obviously, had the work in NXT, did well in there. And then she gets called up to SmackDown. And what happens? In a debut match, breaks her wrist. I mean, talk about a nightmare. Talk about a nightmare. She breaks her wrist on the debut match that she has on SmackDown. She gets cleared. She's been backstage at SmackDown events and Raw tapings for at least the last few weeks prior to her release. Because she'd gone through the process of getting herself cleared. I remember this might have been a couple of months ago, or maybe a month or so ago, there was a Fightful report that Chelsea Green was backstage. She was expected to come out on SmackDown or something like that, and it never happened. And it just feels like with her that it just wasn't the right timing. And then sometimes if you haven't returned on TV, if you're on the sideline and it gets to this kind of part, this kind of the part of the year, they'll just let you go, which is really unfortunate. And the thing is, if you're familiar with Chelsea Green's work in Impact Wrestling as Laura Van Ness, then you know that she's just superb and a real top quality talent. And it is a massive shame. It is a massive shame that she didn't get that opportunity on SmackDown or on Raw or wherever on the main stage, because she is that good. As far as where she goes next, I think it's almost a certainty, to be honest. She goes back to Impact. We've already seen Scott D'Amore and I think Dixie Carter already tweeting about having her back in Impact, talking about having the bride or the crazed bride, the zombie, whatever they wanted to call her, back in Impact Wrestling. And I could see that. Being a former Knockouts champion, given that Matt Cardona, her partner's in Impact Wrestling as well, given her connection to the likes of Scott D'Amore and Don Callis, I think it's a given. And I mentioned those names that have recently departed Impact in terms of the Knockouts division, where it's Ty Valkyrie, Jazz, Nabaya, whoever. I think Chelsea Green just slots right back in, and I think she goes straight into the main event. And to be honest, she comes straight into the main event, and she could immediately maybe come back and become Knockouts champion very, very quickly. So I think it's a given. She goes back to Impact. I really do, and it's a massive scoop for them because she was a great star and a great wrestler for Impact Wrestling. So that's where I see her going back there. And again, this is my point at the start of the video, that with all of these talents, it's not a case that they don't have anywhere to go, and I think that's really important to say as well. Now, another name was Tucker. Now, this one ultimately wasn't necessarily surprising that he was let go because we haven't seen him. The real disappointing thing, and I think the real cold thing by WWE about all of this when it comes to Tucker, is that this was a guy that was literally just cut and thrown to the side, and everyone was waiting for him to be released, frankly. Because this was the odd thing. It always became very apparent that Otis was the star, if you will, in Heavy Machinery. He was getting a push last year with the Mandy Rose stuff and obviously won Money in the Bank. And as soon as that was happening, you kind of knew that eventually they're going to split up. Maybe not necessarily because they should, but because that's what WWE does. And obviously, the Otis stuff just didn't work. This is the interesting thing. The Otis situation with the Money in the Bank and all that kind of stuff didn't work. So they switched it. They switched it to The Miz. Now, don't get me wrong. When it comes to this Otis thing, I always try and remind people about this, that people will go, oh, how did Otis win Money in the Bank? That was such a bad decision. You have to go back to the time. And during that period last year, coming off of WrestleMania and heading into Money in the Bank, Otis was really popular. He was really popular, and a lot of people looked at him and thought, you know what? There might be something there. Turns out there wasn't. And who knows if there necessarily wasn't, but just WWE didn't manage it properly. It didn't work out. Okay, it didn't work out. But if you wanted to switch the Money in the Bank briefcase from Otis to The Miz, you didn't have to split up Heavy Machinery. You're already giving the briefcase to The Miz, proving that you made the wrong decision. If you then split them up, what does Otis have then? Nothing. And this was the strange thing, is that, so they split up. Otis then... They split up, and at that point, hadn't they already been split up anyway because they were drafted to separate brands in the draft? I think I'm remembering that as well. Tucker was drafted to Raw as part in the draft, and everyone went, what? But anyway, they're still kind of together because Otis does appear on Raw under the mask as, was it El Gran Fatso or something like that? It was stupid. Anyway, Tucker does eventually split up from him because he attacks him at Hell in a Cell and aids The Miz in winning the Money in the Bank briefcase. So that happens. Otis then attacks him backstage. They brawl. They just never addressed it. Never addressed it again. Never going to go back to it. And after that, Tucker was just no one. Absolutely no one. I think we saw very brief appearances from him. I think he's lost a load of weight. I think he's in great shape at the moment. I think he was in the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal last week. He might have been eliminated first. I don't know. But what was odd about all of that, what was really odd about all of that now is that Otis is in a tag team again. He's in a tag team with Chad Gable. So you split them up, you tried Otis, it didn't work out, and now he's in a tag team again. It's like the Iconics. It's exactly like the Iconics. They split them up, didn't know what to do after when they split them up, and then put them in separate tag teams. It's stupid. You split them up, obviously, with no plan. That's the confusing thing there for me, and I don't get it. I really don't get it, and I sympathize with Tucker, and I think Tucker was frustrated with all of this as well. He was very frustrated with all of this as well. You should see him on social media this week. He goes, I don't know. Well, I don't know why they split us up. I don't know. Because now you think to yourself, actually, they could do with a proper... I know Otis and Gable are on SmackDown doing a heel tag team, which, again, odd. But you could do with Heavy Machinery, an established tag team on SmackDown right now. But you split them up and you got it wrong. You messed it up. It's just a mess. As far as where he goes, I don't know. That is an interesting one for him. I definitely don't think he goes to AEW. I could see him going to Impact, maybe. I could see him going to Impact. I think, to be honest, if I looked at him, I would say Violent by Design and Impact, he'd be a perfect addition. He really would be a perfect addition in Impact. So I could see him go to Impact, maybe an NWA, possibly Ring of Honor. I don't know if that would be necessarily his style. So maybe an Impact, or maybe just a few independent dates before he builds himself back up. I don't know. It's certainly going to be an interesting one. He's got a really interesting story to tell, though, and he certainly looks very keen on telling it. So that's a fascinating one when it comes to Tucker. Another name released, there are plenty. Kalisto. Now, this one was again, all of these were odd. And I don't mean to repeat myself by saying this was surprising, this was odd. But this one was odd because he split up from the Lucha House Party because I thought WWE might have had plans for him. This is the guy that came back after injury last year, and I mean, that picture there doesn't really do him justice, but he's in the shape of his career. He'd leaned out massively, he'd lost a ton of weight, and earlier on in his WWE career, they obviously had massive plans for Kalisto. Former, was it three-time United States champion? He was beating Alberto Del Rio at the time, which he'd just come back, Del Rio, and had been promised the world in this giant push. And Kalisto was beating him on television because they wanted to make Kalisto the next Rey Mysterio. Obviously, it didn't work out for him. They had the infamous, do lucha things. Remember that promo? It was just after the brand split in 2016. He'd just been drafted to SmackDown. And they were doing these obviously improv promos backstage. And it was just the worst promo you've ever seen in your life. It was terrible. It's so cringe. He just says lucha things and goes off screaming because he can't think of anything. It was terrible. It was really bad. But one thing you couldn't question is that this guy was great in the ring. He really was great in the ring, and he is great in the ring. And he came back last year, and then the storyline was that he was fighting with the other members of the Lucha House Party, Gran Metalik, Lince Dorado, and he'd become too big-headed and all that kind of stuff. So they got drafted to Raw. Kalisto stayed on SmackDown. And we had seen him in a few backstage segments with Sasha Banks prior to WrestleMania. And you may start to think, well, maybe they do something there because Kalisto is actually, in real life, he's very good friends with Sasha Banks. You can go see him on their Instagram accounts. I think Kalisto's wife has done, I don't know if she's like a photographer or something like that, but she's done a lot of shoots with Sasha Banks and Kalisto, and their families are very close together. And so I thought maybe they would do something with that, but they obviously didn't. And look, Kalisto can do really... He can go to a lot of places, I think. I think he really can. I think you talk about Impact. He can go to Impact. He'd be fantastic in the X Division. Could absolutely see Kalisto being an X Division champion without a shadow of a doubt. Maybe that's the best place for him. Even in AEW, I could see him going to AEW. I could see him facing off against the likes of the Lucha Brothers or Pac or those people there. I think he would fit in really well. Obviously, he can go back to Mexico as well. He can do well in AAA, all that kind of stuff. Even Ring of Honor, he could go there, or NWA. For me, I don't think the future is necessarily decided for him. I don't think it's as obvious as some other people, but I do think there are options. Personally, if I'm trying to judge it, I could see him. I really could see him probably going to Impact. I mentioned the X Division there. I think he'd be perfect. And part of my criticism with the X Division over the course of the last 12 months, which they have rectified massively in 2021 in fairness to them, was that they kind of were missing the old school, real amazing X Division high-flying matches, and they've got back to that, especially with Kalisto, if they got Kalisto in there. Kalisto versus an Ace Austin, a Chris Bay, even a Willie Mack. That's exciting. I think that's very exciting. And Kalisto is absolutely someone I could see of being a proper X Division star. So I could see Kalisto going to Impact Wrestling rather. I think that would be a lot of fun. And now another name released was Mojo Rawley. Now this one was surprising in the sense that I always felt that Mojo Rawley was so well liked, and because of his connections outside of the WWE, they would always keep him in. This is a guy that he won the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal in 2017 at WrestleMania 33. That was because of Rob Gronkowski, and then you can see in that picture there. There it is. You can see in the picture there that he's got this sort of shattered glass thing. Because you remember when randomly on Raw, when was this, 2019? 2019, I think it was, when he suddenly started coming to the ring and having all the sort of shattered glass look on his face. Don't know what that was. I guess that was a plan at one point. That was just abandoned. There are so many things in 2019, 2018 on Raw that were built up and then abandoned because they were terrible. And I guess Mojo Rawley's weird gimmick was that. But what was interesting with him is that obviously Gronkowski came in last year. And Gronk was going to be the host of WrestleMania, and Gronk was going to transition, people forget, into becoming a WWE superstar. And these plans were made prior to the pandemic. I know Gronk actually came in during the pandemic, but these plans were made prior to the pandemic, and Gronk was going to have matches in WWE. I mean, I know people just think he was just going to host WrestleMania, but he was going to be a superstar. He was going to have matches. SummerSlam that year was going to be in Boston. I mean, Boston, a former Patriot, having a match. Are you kidding me? So that was the plan. Gronk was going to become a WWE superstar. He had signed a multi-year contract. He really had. So Mojo Rawley was going to be a big part of that, and that was going to be job security for him. He was going to be either a tag team with Gronk or maybe even a feud with him. He was going to really rise up the ranks, and obviously the Gronk experiment didn't work, or Gronk didn't feel that it was the right place for him, or decided he had unfinished business in the NFL. Obviously it worked out for him. The guy just won a Super Bowl, and what did he get? 2 touchdowns in the Super Bowl as well. He's going to be with Tom Brady for a second year at the Buccaneers, so obviously he made the right decision there, but it kind of left Mojo Rawley in limbo a little bit, and maybe that's the case of he just wasn't doing anything, and WWE felt, you know what, it just hasn't worked out. And I do sympathize with him because they have tried a ton of gimmicks for him, and it just hasn't worked out. The one thing I will say though about Mojo Rawley is that universally, and I've never had the pleasure of meeting him myself, but universally, everyone that's ever met him or done an interview with him or had any interactions with Mojo Rawley has said time and time again that the guy is just an unbelievably nice guy, relentlessly positive, and a real great guy to talk to or be around. He was very well liked backstage. So it's a strange one because you do have to factor in a lot of things when you're WWE, is that this was a real damaging day in terms of morale. It really was. I mean, coming out of WrestleMania, morale was so high and positive because the return of fans, it felt like a big deal, and it felt like finally, after 12 real long months, they were getting back to a place that they wanted to be. And then next thing you know, they just do this complete eradication of any good morale by releasing all of these people. As far as where does Mojo Rawley go, this one's a tough one. I could see him. I really actually could see him doing an appearance in AEW. I don't know how high up the card he would get in there. My concern, if I was him, would be, am I just going to be on Dark or Dark Elevation? I do think because of his football background and his football connections, that could make sense, him being an AEW. Obviously, Tony Khan owns the Jacksonville Jaguars. They could do a lot of fun stuff with him. And again, he is well liked in terms of the industry. So I could see that connection. I could see him coming in there possibly. I think if he goes to Impact, I could see that happening because obviously his former tag team partner Matt Cardona is there. He was tag team partners with Mojo in WWE, known as the Hype Bros, and obviously Matt Cardona was tweeting a lot about this because he was released at this time last year as well, and he was tweeting that not only his partner Chelsea Green gets released, but also his former tag team partner Mojo Rawley. So I could see Mojo Rawley coming into Impact if Matt Cardona's in there. And to be honest, considering the roster, who's to say Mojo Rawley doesn't ascend up the card in Impact Wrestling? You've got a former football player in Moose still under contract of Impact Wrestling, so maybe Mojo Rawley can do the same thing. Maybe it's just about getting the opportunity that he needs. So I could see an AEW or an Impact run. As far as Ring of Honor, I just don't know. With a lot of these names, to be honest, I just don't know if I can see a lot of these guys going to Ring of Honor. I'm not sure. But Mojo, I could see, like I said, I wouldn't rule AEW out. I don't know if he'd necessarily be the right move, but I could see him going to Impact. I could see him going to Impact Wrestling. Another name that wasn't necessarily so surprising was Bo Dallas. Now, Bo Dallas actually hadn't been on WWE television. This was amazing. Hadn't been on WWE television since Crown Jewel 2019. He had been off of television for like nearly 2 years. which kind of crazy that he was still under contract. But what was interesting about him is for a long, long time, he had just been sat at catering or sat at home not doing anything. But what was interesting is some reports came out and said, actually, Bo Dallas had been backstage recently at Raw and SmackDown events. I don't know for WrestleMania, but certainly for some SmackDown TV tapings recently, he'd actually done some matches. They were test matches just to check the Thunderdome, see if it works, check the cameras, whatever. But he had been there. I don't know if that necessarily equated to plans for him to return, but there had been rumors that basically he was expecting it and he was expecting to be released, or when his contract expired, he was going to retire. And that he lives on I think it was Dave Meltzer said he lives on a farm with Liv Morgan. Liv Morgan's his partner, if you didn't know that. And they live on a farm or a ranch somewhere, and Bo Dallas had actually opened up his own real estate business or something like that, and he was basically waiting for the call, basically. So I don't know if that's necessarily surprising. Obviously, the surprising element about it is that he's Bray Wyatt's brother, and he's part of the Rotunda family, and they're very well respected within the industry and WWE. There were these weird rumors, weren't there, at WrestleMania, that Bo Dallas was actually playing The Fiend, or he was playing The Fiend at Fastlane, and he was playing him at WrestleMania, and they were going to do a Fiend versus Fiend angle, and that's why Alexa Bliss had turned on The Fiend at WrestleMania, because it wasn't actually Bray Wyatt. At the time, I never believed those. I thought they were ludicrous rumors. The tattoos were obviously a giveaway, and then as soon as you see him on Raw, Bray Wyatt's back. It had nothing to do with anything like that. So hopefully that quashes those rumors. As far as where do I see him going, look, if those reports are to be believed, I don't necessarily know if I see him anywhere, to be honest. And there are some names that just, once they released by WWE, they didn't want to do anything. Curtis Axel's another name. Bo Dallas' tag team partner. He got released last year and he hasn't done anything. He sat back, he's happy doing what he's doing, and that's it. So who's to say Bo Dallas doesn't do the same? A lot of these people might have outside investments. Bo Dallas might not be any different. So I'm not necessarily sure if I see him going anywhere, to be honest. And finally, we had Wesley Blake eliminated, released, and I feel really bad for him here, because talk about a guy that just so unfortunate. This is a guy that was in NXT for a long time, a really long time. He was tag team partner with Buddy Murphy, split up. Buddy Murphy goes to the main roster. He's part of the Forgotten Sons in NXT, finally goes to the main roster. Jackson Riker suddenly reveals he's this big Trump supporter, and next thing you know, he gets, they all get disbanded, and it looks like that Jackson Riker gets the heat, and Wesley Blake and Steve Cutler, they're removed from television. You're like, what? How does that work? Now, eventually, they get brought back to television. They're going to be part of Baron Corbin's faction, the King Corbin's faction, the Knights of the Lone Wolf. What happens there? Well, Steve Cutler contracts COVID as part of a New Year's Eve party. Vince McMahon throws a hissy fit about that, releases Steve Cutler. Wesley Blake, once again, is left in the lurch. So this guy's had his WWE career on the main roster ruined by his, I don't want to blame Steve Cutler too much, but essentially hampered by two of his tag team partners. He's done nothing wrong, and yet he's the one without a job, and Jackson Riker's still on television. Jackson Riker was at WrestleMania. Jackson Riker appeared at WrestleMania with Elias during the Shane McMahon Braun Strowman match. How is that seem fair? And it just goes to show that none of this is fair. And it's really unfortunate, because a guy that did nothing wrong. He did nothing wrong. And that doesn't feel right, does it? That doesn't feel right at all. And it's a massive shame. As far as where I see him going next, look, Steve Cutler is on the free agent list. I did a video before about Steve Cutler saying that I think he'll go to Impact Wrestling, because obviously he's got the connection with Deonna Purrazzo there. The good thing now, I suppose, is that given that Cutler and Wesley Blake were a tag team, they can come into maybe Impact Wrestling and be a tag team. That's where I expect him to go. I expect him, though, to go where Steve Cutler goes. Most likely Impact. I mentioned about Ring of Honor, though. I could see them going to Ring of Honor. I could also see him going to NWA. Don't necessarily think I see him going to AEW. That AEW tag team division is just ginormous, absolutely stacked. And if I was them, I'd say, go somewhere else first, get yourself over a bit more, and then maybe AEW is an opportunity in the future. But it's unfortunate. It really is unfortunate for Wesley Blake, because as I mentioned, he hasn't done anything wrong, and yet he's the one that gets released. But there you go. This is just one man's opinion. These are all of those releases that have been confirmed so far. That's where I think they'll go and my opinions on them. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about WWE, AEW, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube, got the rankings, and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right-hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video, along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.